Hope that not disappoints, but I just want to give background why I'm here in the first place. Last bid, I don't know how long ago, how many months, but Sergeant Matt Tinney was my supervisor in the Valley Area Command. He had Dr. Rosenbaum come for one of our shift briefings with our and the other squad, and kind of introducing us to Dr. Rosenbaum and the behavioral health sciences. And during that, we started talking about, which I believe is still going on, the UNM mindfulness-based resiliency training research study. I think it started with the Portland Police Department, and Albuquerque joined in the last year or two. And I had actually gone through that training, and Dr. Rosenbaum asked me what I thought about it, and I told him, hey, you know, it really reinforced some things for me that kind of I had already been introduced to some mindfulness concepts prior to that training, and so it wasn't like brand new to me. And with him in the squad, I told him, you know, to not discredit it. I really credit it with saving my life, though earlier on in my adult life, these kind of mindfulness-based principles, and that I had a lot of depression and anxiety as a younger adult, like well before I became a police officer. And that I think some mindfulness principles kind of helped me with that. And when I did this training through UNM, it just kind of reinforced some of those things for me and validated them, I think. He asked me what I thought about presenting for this group, the SCION, if I ever wanted to do that. And initially I told him sure. And then a couple days later, I think I emailed him saying, I don't think I want to do a presentation to the SCION group. And some months later, I reached back out and I said, you know, I think I'd be willing to present. And so that brings me here till today, why I'm here. So before coming to New Mexico, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was the youngest of 4 children. Volleyball was kind of a popular sport in Pennsylvania, and particularly for my family, it was a big thing for us. My older brother and I, we had 50 tons of construction sand delivered in our driveway. We had the neighborhood kids kind of wheel it to the backyard. We had a 50-ton sand volleyball court. My parents went along with it. We kind of re-landscaped the backyard to have this volleyball court created in our backyard, and a lot of fun. Would have neighbors, friends come over and just play a lot of volleyball, especially in the warmer time of the year. It was kind of our own little sand volleyball court in our backyard. My school in Pennsylvania, I think it's mostly California, have the competitive men's volleyball college teams. However, in Pennsylvania, Penn State was probably like the only college in the area that had a men's volleyball thing going on. And about half the high schools in my area, my high school didn't have a volleyball team. However, I kind of was instrumental in starting one my senior year. We started a team to join kind of half the teams that had a volleyball team for men. Like all of them had them for women, but it was like 50-50 in that area of Pennsylvania. So going forward a couple of years, my brother ended up living in Virginia Beach, Virginia. He was a little taller than me. Whoever knows me, I'm only about 5'7". I don't have the best physical attributes for a volleyball player. My brother, though, he played amateur competitions. He'd win some money at some volleyball tournaments. I ended up moving to Virginia Beach, Virginia to be with him. It was a great time. We were always kind of close. He's deceased now. He ended up getting cancer, passed away some years ago. But going from playing indoor volleyball, that's like roughly a 30-foot by 60-foot court with an 8-foot net with 6 people on a team, to going to the beach where you have the same size court, but you only have 2 people on the court at a time, and you've got the wind and the sun and the sand. It just, using the same parameters, it becomes a much more difficult sport. But every night or week would be down at the beach, my brother and I and other friends playing beach volleyball. It was just, for a couple of years, it was a really a big hobby for me. At the time, I was working at a bakery and doing some construction work. Hadn't even thought of law enforcement back then in the late 1990s. Somewhere along the way, Dr. Rosenbaum's book, I picked up The Inner Game of Tennis. And when I played volleyball, a lot of times it was a lot of fun, but sometimes it'd be really frustrating. Whoever's played sports maybe can relate to having a lot of highs and lows during a sporting event. And, sometimes I think I would be my own worst enemy. And that, if my head got out of the game or I was screwing up, I'd be, man, like I'm sucking today. Like my head could just get out of the game, and without my opponent even doing anything, that they could beat us just because mentally wasn't in the game. So reading this book, it kind of talks everything Dr. Rosenbaum introduced us to. I started applying some of the principles during a play. One technique they had was just kind of, for tennis, was watching the ball just to kind of exclude that mental chatter during a game and just kind of being focused and in the present moment. Talked about watching the seams of the ball spinning, the path, the trajectory, the speed of the ball. With volleyball, it's even easier because that ball is so much bigger than a tennis ball and it's moving slower. And he talked about being in between points. It was, in his theory, important to kind of stay in the present moment, not to go into the future or past. He said it'd be kind of silly to go watch the ball, like things in motion naturally grab our attention, but in between points, he had another technique to kind of stop maybe some of that mental chatter, thinking too much into the future or too much into the past. And all I remember from that technique was using the breathing. He says, you're not trying to control your breathing. You're just using it as kind of something to maybe disrupt your thinking. Like if you're worried about the point you just screwed up, or, if you're down and you're about to lose the next point, maybe you'll lose the game or the tournament. Like his argument was, it just wasn't conducive to trying to get into that flow state where you're in the zone or playing hot. In between points, he argued it was important to stay in the present moment. And so I picked up that technique. So from the time I stepped onto the volleyball court to the time I stepped off, I was like, hey, this is so cool. I only have to worry about two things, during play, pay attention to the ball, to exclude that mental chatter. And in between points, I can kind of let go of that mental stuff going on. It was always easier if we were winning. Like if we're up or ahead, it was a much less mentally stressful game. But man, when you're behind or you're down, it's hard. He had this philosophy in that book too, that, our goal really, we want to win, the game, or in general, we want to win. But his argument was, we shouldn't really be focused on winning or losing, because really part of that's beyond our control. We can't necessarily control our opponents, their skill level, their abilities. However, we can control ourselves, how well we're playing. If we're playing better, that's going to contribute towards winning. But we should really focus kind of what we're doing, how well we're playing, and not on this external thing of winning or losing the game. And that was a lot easier if I was winning than losing, kind of remembering that. But like he talked about Serena Williams in that tennis, like, gosh, the level of focus, maybe if she's even losing a game, to be able to get into. I think I recognized that playing volleyball. Like, it was frustrating losing a game, but even then I'd be more focused. I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to be in the present moment. I'm not going to worry about what I just screwed up or what might happen, several points down the way. I'm just going to give everything I have right now to play the best I can right now, even if I'm getting totally smoked. Like, there's no hope of winning this game. That's not the goal. And, being able to come back from like being down a huge deficit was like an awesome thing, which happens sometimes. I started playing better, and beyond just playing better, I didn't have the mental frustration prior to reading that book that I used to experience. Sometimes the game was fun, but it wasn't always fun. Sometimes, you see athletes just getting really pissed off and getting upset. And, I think we've probably all experienced that in life. So just from the time I'd step onto the court to the time I stepped off, it just became a so much more rewarding experience applying those principles from the book. Not only did I play better mentally, I'd still get frustrated or disappointed, but it didn't carry on or expand to like just totally take me out of the game. Like mentally, instead of like this huge roller coaster during a game of excitement and frustration, it was more just enjoyment and kind of reward without all the valleys of the sucky parts of the game. At the time, however, I was having a lot of anxiety and depression in my life. It got to the point where one night I made a plan to kill myself. I drove down to the beach. I had a plan to end my life. With the anxiety and depression I was having at the time, I think maybe a little guardian angel or something saved me from following through with my plan, but it was pretty bad for me. I had anxiety and depression to the point where I didn't feel like I belonged in the world. I was like, I don't know, I just thought I should kill myself. And that was the level of mental anguish I was having at the time. I was probably in my early 20s at the time. And somehow in the book, I think he talked about life in general, kind of in vague terms, like, the inner game of life, so to speak. But, I didn't remember him talking about any techniques. And I thought I could see a parallel, though, what I experienced in volleyball and what was going on in my life, and trying to bridge that gap. Like, how could I change my life kind of like the changes I had seen on the volleyball court? And I didn't know what to do. I remember at the bakery, at this little specialty bread bakery I worked at, I'd get up at 3 a.m. by myself, go into work. I'd be measuring pounds and pounds of water, flour, yeast to make all these hundreds of loaves of bread. And I'm like, okay, you know what? Maybe I can just pay attention to what I'm doing to kind of shut some of my mental chatter up. I'd, pay attention consciously, like to weighing the stuff, and didn't really seem to be working for me. Through default, I ended up going to the breathing. I'd say probably for a period of about 1.5 years. Like, on the court was great, but my life outside of volleyball sucked. I'd experiment. At first, it felt kind of weird. Like, what would somebody think if they saw me walking down the street and they knew I was like paying attention to my breathing, partially as I was walking down the street, or even maybe having a conversation with somebody. Like, what would this person think if they knew I was like partially, paying attention to my breathing during this conversation? It just seemed weird and awkward. But I was desperate because of this anxiety, depression, and, the point where I wanted to kill myself. I needed to try something. I think I didn't consider counseling or medications at the time, maybe, as just, I don't know. So over a period of 1.5 years of it kind of experimenting, I ended up getting to this point where I just used my breathing kind of throughout my day. Like, I might watch a movie or something and I didn't think about my breathing at all, like, just something that's engaging by itself. But at home or at work or just in life in general, I kind of picked up this habit of using my breathing as like a focus point. Later on, I think that led to my interest in meditation. And I've heard of things being used in meditation, like a mantra or a flame or a picture, but probably more than anything else, I've heard of using the breathing as a focus during meditation. I've heard of this term called the monkey mind. Even in this book, The Inner Game of Tennis, he talked about, like, I don't know how to shut self one up, how to make it quiet. And as an experiment, he talked about like setting a timer for 30 seconds, just trying not to think for 30 seconds. And I've done it and talked to other people about this exercise. For me at the time, trying to just sit and not think for 30 seconds was a difficult exercise. And so part of his, philosophy is giving that self something to focus on, during the game, whether it's watching the ball. He had another exercise called bounce hit, like when the ball hit the ground to say bounce, and when it hit your racket to say hit. A little different, but so lost my train of thought for a second. But ultimately, just like happened in volleyball, I feel like in life, I'd still have some of that starting of maybe depression or anxious thoughts coming up, but they never escalated or expanded. I wanted to read one little quote we had from this class I did through UNM, the police resiliency training. Kind of just felt like it articulated kind of how my mind used to work, or still does, but not to the extent it used to. In that class, they use body awareness. I don't know if anybody's heard of body scanning. That's another type of meditation I had never done before that I did in this police training, using the awareness of your body. We do body scans starting from your foot, coming up your leg. And it's kind of that similar thing to me of kind of bringing you away from that self-one mental chatter to just some kind of present moment awareness. I'm just going to read, it's just one little paragraph. It says, our minds wander around all day and night, creating predictions and fictitious stories, replaying the past, or trying to control the future. We're so engaged in these stories and ruminations that we often miss what is actually happening right now, what is real. Our bodies, however, are always here in the present and can help us come back to reality. This week, we'll learn ways to use the experience of the physical body to bring us back from the irrational rabbit holes and storms our minds love to get lost in. I think for me as a young adult, I just maybe had a hyperactive mind. Not only would I get lost in a rabbit hole, it would like spiral to these places, where I just had so much anxiety and depression that I wanted to kill myself. And for me, that present moment awareness, for me, I use the breathing, just kind of stopped that for over 20 years now. This all kind of happened before I was a police officer. I think Dr. Rosenbaum asked me the other week, we talked a little bit, how do I feel like that's helped me as being a police officer? And I think I talked a little bit about Dr. Rosenbaum. I was going through some of your slides last night from prior presentations. You talked about stimulus and reaction. There's potentially a space between, the stimulus we get and how we react to it. For me, whether it's body scanning or breathing, I feel like that helps me have a little bit of a space a lot of times between, in police work especially, somebody screaming at me in my face, pissed off, F you cop, blah, blah, blah. Instead of me maybe reacting instantaneously to this stimulus, just having that choice, like how am I going to respond to this? And for me, that breathing kind of helps create that space between stimulus and reaction in my police work to hopefully maybe if there's that opportunity to de-escalate a situation and or not react poorly myself, getting engaged in this, verbal struggle that could turn into a physical struggle. Also another book I love, sorry if I'm just rambling a little bit, is that Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. I think Dr. Gilmartin, haven't read it recently, but I've compared law enforcement, but like as methamphetamines. Probably, I've never done meth, but I imagine the first time somebody does meth, they probably feel like Superman, like you get this awesome stimulus rush or something. Over time though, it has a disastrous effect on a person, physically. And I almost compare law enforcement to that, in that Dr. Gilmartin's book, I think he talks about, that is super engagement with law enforcement as a young officer. It's exciting and, it's just really engaging, but over time, those swings up and down can have a bad effect over a career of law enforcement. I just say my hat's off to all the APD officers that have worked for bigger city agencies. Most of my career was rural New Mexico, 10 plus years with state police, little town of Socorro, a sheriff's office. Would have critical incidents, but they were way less frequent than my last year here working Albuquerque Police Department. The amount of, that alert tone is like giving me post-traumatic stress just here in Albuquerque. Every priority one, they start with that alert tone. Beep, and like some shit really bad is happening right now, and I'm gonna possibly be going to deal with it. Like those might happen once a week, maybe even once a month, most of my past career. And just as I developed have helped me survive. I feel like I'm at the end of my career now, working in Albuquerque. That PTSD is building up more. The guy that led our training, he was a retired lieutenant from Portland Police Department. Can't remember his name right now. I remember him advocating counseling. I've taken advantage of the generous behavioral health services to kind of check in. For me, I view it hopefully as a preventative maintenance, not that I've got any super crisis going on. But I think I'm wrapping up. If I rambled a little bit or this seemed off topic, I apologize. I appreciate the opportunity to share, and that's kind of my story. I have at least one or more questions for the audience, asking for help at whatever point. I was told to prepare, so.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Greg. You can go ahead and ask your question now. And then if you guys have answers, again, you guys can always unmute or you can type it into the chat.
Sure, I might have more than one question, but I'll just start with the first one. I feel like, you know, I see sometimes my coworkers get engaged in a call for service or maybe some irate person. For me, I don't feel like I have an issue kind of disengaging and standing back and not getting wrapped up into a call, maybe excessive use of force, potentially, or whatever. My hardest part is with my home, with my wife and kids. They're in the room here with me, but sometimes the hardest thing for me is to create that space in the closest relationships for me between stimulus and reaction. I don't know why. I know it's my closest relationships I have the most difficulty, but if anybody had any advice on that, creating that space between stimulus and reaction in our closest relationships. You know, if my wife's upset and yells at me, I'm probably going to yell back at her, or potentially even my kids. I'm not the best in my personal close relationships that I'm able to do at work. I have a couple other questions potentially as well, but I just thought I'd ask that one for now. Or maybe even insight. Why is it harder for me with those close relationships to not react immediately to that stimulus? I don't understand why. I could throw out a couple other questions too. I just had them written down just in case.
That was a really good question, Greg.
Yeah, it's a great question. Okay. Let's see what people think.
Niels, did you have an answer? It looked like
I always have something to say, but I want to defer to the group first.
Okay. It's funny, while we're waiting to see if anyone will write in the chat. When we were doing cop pop training, we always talk about taking the emotions out of conflict, right? And not trying to look at the issue and focus on the issue and not the emotions that come with the issue. And I have no idea how to do that. I think it's just, it's a little bit about, I think kind of like what you were saying, right? You know, focusing on the ball and how it spins and how it does this and how it does that. But rather, instead of it being the ball, focus on this is the issue, and how does it, when it rotates one way, how does it affect the emotions, or how does it affect, or what's the cause of that effect, is one way to try to look at it. Lieutenant Sturba from Bosque Farms wrote, I imagine on the job we have a wall up versus at home. At home we let our guard down and tend to let emotions run without control. 100% agree with that a lot.
There's another.
Yep. James Eichel said, call wise. Sounds like you like to be out of your head to handle it from a safer position rather than getting sucked in, which has proven can get us in trouble. I think that is good of you. Easily getting sucked into our personal relations is easier because it matters more. Regardless of topic, when it's with an important person, we want so badly to express ourselves. Very true. Very true.
Okay, if anybody else wants to jump in, I will stop talking, but I can't help myself. No, I think the people are exactly right. It's these people are part of you, and so it's hard to disentangle. And these are sort of patterns that you've established, so it goes right to the core of you, and it sort of bypasses some of that training. So that's why it probably sucks you in, and that's why it's harder. One of the things you can do is talk to your spouse about these patterns and say, you know, next time this happens, I want to try to focus on my breathing so it doesn't escalate. Sort of recruit her into helping you. The other is to practice in your mind, to visualize it. It's sort of to look forward to the opportunity to turning to your breath the next time you get in a fight with your spouse. It's inevitable you're going to get in a fight with your spouse. So sit down and think about, imagine a fight, imagine a scenario, and imagine yourself turning to your breathing and play that out, and then sort of look forward to it, not to pick a fight with her, but to kind of look forward to the opportunity to try it out. And if you are able to, great. And if you're not, that's okay, and just keep practicing. And then one other thing, which is a little bit more difficult, but is a good way to do these things, is to think about when someone's yelling at you, the last thing you think about is what they need. What are they needing right now? So you look at them and they're just yelling at you, and you immediately think, oh, fuck you, and I didn't do that. And you think of all the cool, really smart things to say and all your defense, and I'll prove that I'm right and she's wrong. And then what? She's going to say, oh my gosh, you're right, I am a terrible person. You know, that's never going to happen. So one of the things you can do is, and it takes practice and you can rehearse it, is put your needs-based glasses on. What is the person really needing? So if someone's yelling you about taking out the trash, maybe they really just need you to support them in having a clean house. Maybe they just need order in their life. And these are principles from a book called Nonviolent Communication. And I suggest it to anybody who's interested in it. So the idea is and you can make a game of it. As they're yelling at you, think, instead of getting defensive and angry, think, what is this person really needing? How can I translate it into a need? Are they needing to know that I love them? Are they needing order in their life? So they're yelling about how you didn't take out the trash, but really what they want is order in their life. And you can say that. I see you're really upset about this, and having an orderly home is really important to you. And that can sort of cut through a lot of this stuff. So you can try any of those things.
I appreciate it.
Sure.
Hey, Niels, before I read what James wrote, when you were talking about, like, think of scenarios, is this like for future? So like when I want to go buy a gun, I should just think about the arguments that I'll have with my wife, so that way I can prepare to win?
Yes, that's it. But let's say you want to buy a gun and she doesn't want to spend money on a gun, right? So you can rehearse that conversation in your mind, but try to practice, well, what is she needing? What is she wanting? And maybe what she really needs is a sense of security in a home that's free of weapons. I have no idea. Or maybe she's worried about money, you know, and that she wants security in her life. So you can tell her those things. I know security financially is super important to you. And let's talk about that kind of thing.
Awesome, I like it. James wrote, one thing we practice at home is when we feel that whirlwind, we pause. We separate and write down 3 things. 1, I own what we own about the negative dispute. 2, I feel what we feel about it. And 3, I need what we seek from the other. I really like that, James.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I am going to steal that.
Thank you.
And that's a really great technique, if nothing else, just to pause. And sometimes when couples fight, in the middle of the fight, if you can remember to be like, let's take a time out and go get some, well, you can't do this now, but let's go get some ice cream, or let's take a walk around the block and just talk about something completely different. It's amazing. And you say, well, pick up exactly where you left off. Studies show that it just goes better.
Yeah.
So great advice. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions or comments for Greg? Mark, go ahead.
All right, am I? Oh,
Well, you muted yourself again. There you
how
go.
about now?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Kind of piggyback on what Doc said. What I learned, Greg, was when I was active, and I'm just going to use a domestic as an example. We go into somebody's house and we're telling the husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, or whoever, you know, this is what you got to do. We may arrest you, we may not arrest you, or whatever. But you know, we're in control. The law enforcement officer, the cops in control. Just like on a traffic stop or any call, you know, we have to be in control because that's number one. That's our job for our safety. And in our reality, cops are control freaks also. So to kind of go to your personal life, you get in an argument with your other half, and he or she says something that you don't like. Well, toughen up here a little bit. You're gonna have to take that. You know what I mean? Where and we've all been in situations of active cops. You know, somebody says something that pisses you off. Sometimes you arrest them for POP or pissed off the police. Yeah, you know, some BS disorderly charge or something like that. So when you're at home, it's a game changer. And as we know in law enforcement, you know, it becomes our identity. You know, no matter, it's just the way we are. It's our identity. You know, we go to a restaurant, we face the door. We're at red lights. We're looking at license plates. We're looking all around us. You know, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to kind of draw that line when you come home. You're not a cop at the house. So that's what I did in my. I've been with I moved with my wife for 33 years. I met her in 1985, and in those 33 years I've been with her, it's 34. I was a cop, so I had that kind of cop mentality with her early in our relationship, and that shit doesn't float. So it just I have learned that to give a little, you got to take a little. And when a bad guy is yelling at you, they're not yelling at Mark DeBono. They're not yelling, I don't like Mark DeBono. They don't like Mark DeBono, the cop. But when your other half is yelling at you, this is the person that you sleep with. This is the person you eat dinner with. This is the person you're going to spend the rest of your life with. It's a game changer. So when they are yelling at you, you do take it personal, absolutely, because you care about it. The bad guy you can either arrest, walk away from, or whatever. Yeah, you know. But at home, so what I learned to do in my marriage, and I have a very stable marriage, and I'm not bragging. I left the job at the door. That was the bottom line. It was tough. You know, it was. And then I remember one time my wife and I we got in an argument right after I retired because I wanted to go out and buy this brand new truck and dropped $60,000-$70,000 on it and on. And she said no, and I'm like, what do you mean no? And then I got mad, and she's like, we can't afford it. And I'm like, yeah, we can. I broke it all down, and on. In all reality, she was 100% right. Yeah, you know, and I'm still driving my 2005 F-150. Yeah, you know, yeah. So, but it is so. Just to give it a little, you got to take a little, bro. I don't know if that made any sense or not. I already just rambled, but I apologize.
No, thanks for sharing your experiences. I appreciate it.
Anytime, brother. And I wish you the best, bro. And good job, always.
Did you have other questions too, Greg?
If you want them, I'm okay to stop or throw them out there. I don't know, however.
Sure. Let's hear another.
All right, another. I open up a can of worms here. You know, I felt like I figured out how to not make my life suck, like through this inner game and applying it in my own way, the breathing, mindfulness stuff for me in my daily life. Over the years, my kids are all teenagers now. Sometimes I'd start playing a video game with them. Remember one was stupid, like Angry Birds, but I noticed this pattern. Sometimes my kids would go to bed and I'm like trying to beat this online video game and it's just like unhealthy. And I remember hearing somebody say once, like, video game addiction is like a false sense of accomplishment or something. It's like, I've got to beat this next level or something. And currently I'm not addicted to a video game, but next month, whatever my kids are playing, I'll probably be up till 3 a.m. while they're in sleep, like trying to beat this game. And something I've struggled on and off with, like video game addiction, throughout my being a police officer, I guess, a parent. It's something that just thrown out there. I read this book, the Book of Habit, Charles Duhigg. I don't know if it really sat in with me. He talked about, some case studies of, this one lady that was a gambling addict, this kind of like, there's that craving, and then there's how we respond to it, and then the reward or something. I don't know. I haven't really come up with a good solution, but that was one of my potential questions to throw out. I never went. I have been going to see a counselor. For me, it's like preventative health, behavioral sciences offers that to us. It's been recommended to me. I appreciate the opportunity to go see a counselor periodically to check in. I've never really pursued the addiction stuff. It's not something I'm currently struggling with, but probably within the last few years probably was an issue for me, video game addiction. But
I, again, always have something to say, but
okay.
I'll let, does anybody else have something they wanted to suggest or add?
I just learned that I'm not good at video games, and so I just let my kids play them.
So, I mean, if you're trying to avoid that late night playing video games, just a couple simple things. Well, one is simple and one is a little bit more difficult. So 2 suggestions. One, when you have the impulse not to do it, like you're like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to get sucked into this.
Yeah.
Make it more difficult for when you do want to do it. So,
Yeah.
like, let's say it's plugged in and everything, unplug it, remove it, put it in a cabinet somewhere.
Yeah.
Take 5 minutes to set up a barrier. And
Yeah.
so when you do get that impulse, it's not just flip on the TV and start playing.
Right.
You
Right.
have to go over here, you have to do
Okay.
that. And it gives you
Sure.
some time to pause. The
Yeah.
other is, and you can even put a book there or something that you want to do. So you go over to the video console and there's a book sitting there, and
Yeah.
you know that you have to go somewhere else to
Yeah.
get it. And the other is with cravings, one of the best things to do with cravings is just to ride them out, just to use your mindfulness, breathe, and ask yourself, what is this craving? Where do I feel it in my body? What is it like? And craving is just another emotion that's going to come, it's going to peak, and then it's going to pass. And so you can just sort of with curiosity, watch it come and go, and then turn your attention to something else.
Thank you.
And Charles Duhigg is the brother of Dan Duhigg, our former, not former colleague, but our colleague with CIT ECHO.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that was awesome. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments or answers for Greg?
Here's something in the chat.
Ooh, there we go. I like Andrew. I was going to say, Andrew always has something about video games. So I use video games as an escape too. I feel like it's an environment that I have control over, and I have and has a conclusive story with normally a positive outcome. Very, very true. And then Lieutenant Serba again wrote 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. It's a great book on habit and perspective and transformation. So that is another book.
I do want to add something about the video games. Video games are not a bad thing by nature. I mean, you have free time and you have to do something with that free time. So if you use them without, staying up till 3 in the morning, they're actually good. And there's studies early on that show that you know, surgeons who play video games actually have better outcomes than those who don't. You know, it actually, some of them have positive impacts on your brain, and they are perfectly designed to keep you in the flow, the zone. They're always just enough challenging and always just enough reward that it naturally puts you in that inner game flow state, and time just goes zip, and that feels good.
Another person wrote just to me, they had to leave, but they wanted to know that they appreciated you and appreciated your courage and willingness to share today.
I appreciate that. Thanks. Part of me didn't want to come do this, but I'm here. So thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm so glad you did. I think you did a great job. Thank you.
Yeah, I learned a lot, and you know, I was just looking forward to your presentation, especially when you were talking about the inner game of tennis and talking about kind of just your thoughts on how you evolved that from one part of your life to being a police officer now. And so I enjoyed it. I always learn something, but it also gives me that extra boost for the month. I always just look forward to that first week because it gives me that oomph to keep moving forward.
Oh, I do have one other thing. The research that he is talking about, the mindfulness research, is still going on. So any local law enforcement is welcome. I think it's open to APD, BCSO. I think all local law enforcement. I'm not sure. So it's still going on. They're still recruiting. If you're interested in doing it, just contact me and I'll put you in touch with the people who can get you involved with that.
I just put my plug for the mindfulness training. Just I support it, and you know, they're doing research to see, does this really, you know, scientifically, can we show that, you know, this can help police officers, police work, this type of training. And anyways, thanks, Dr. Rosenbaum, for mentioning that. I forgot to. I just wanted to encourage anybody. I got paid on duty to do it. I believe agency still supporting that. Yes. I get comp time or time on duty to go participate in this research and training. And
Chief Medina just approved that also.
Okay.
Awesome. Andrew and both James said, thank you for sharing your story. And James said that this was his first time tuning in and that he was glad that he did. And so we are thankful for James logging on, but we're also extremely thankful for you, Greg, for sharing your story.
Thank you.
If nobody else has any other comments, questions, we will go ahead and wrap it up. Next month is January already. It's amazing. This year went by slow, but also extremely fast at the same time. But January 7th, we will be having our next presentation, and that will be by Lieutenant Ferris Simmons. And so she will be giving her presentation. It'll be pretty thought-provoking and probably invite some few tears. And so one that will definitely hit the heartstrings. And so we will be looking forward to that. If you guys have any other comments, questions, you guys can always email myself, Melissa Schultz, or Dr. Rosenbaum. And if you guys want to present and you haven't presented or you'd like to present more, you can always come out to us and we will put you in the lineup. And with that, we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks.